to your point about thought leadership, what a perfect time to think about expertise and thought leadership when we have access to effectively infinite markets and the cost of publication has dropped to essentially zero, with a zero marginal cost. There couldn't be a more amazing time to be producing high quality content. The downside is it's also easier to produce crap. You're competing against junk. That's the challenge now, is how do you, and I think you've probably captured this better than anybody in your training, is how do you recognize that most of what's out there that you're going to be competing against is probably junk, and that you need to rise above that. That's a very different animal.
Yeah, there's so many interesting things in what you said there. One of the things you talked about, which is probably not a predominant idea, is that the downsides of direct response marketing approach, not saying it's bad, but just that it has downsides. What was your journey there, realizing that, okay, it can't be all that. We should also do branding and think about other ways to go up the mountain? Because you spend over $100 million in paid advertising and it's working well.
Yeah, I mean, I've managed a lot of paid advertising, and I've been in other masterminds, and Andre and I have consulted for some of the bigger direct response companies. I've consulted with other direct response companies. This is a funny thing about the big direct response companies. Outside of those companies, people look to them as being like the source of how to do things. Inside the walls of those companies, many of them are thinking, wow, this isn't continuing to work the way it used to work. We need to do something else. So this weird dynamic. Of course it still works, right? There's still, there are several $billion-dollar plus big direct response companies out there. Direct response still works in principle. And if you embrace the principles of direct response, to me, that makes perfect sense. But when you become dogmatic and a purist about it, that's where anything starts to fall apart. Is if you have to make the sale in the first interaction, for example, if that's part of the dogma, that creates so many problematic downstream effects. And unless you can make a very simple change and say, I'm willing to engage with your attention and not require you to purchase or not require you to opt in. I mean, this is a classic example. Think about the most classic direct response informed, quote unquote, funnel. Hate that word, but think about the classic model. You pay for somebody's attention, and then you immediately bring them to a decision point where they can't proceed past that unless they give you an email address. They opt in, and then you give them something with bells and whistles, a free report, a video series. In what world where else do we do that? How many stores have you ever walked into where you walk in and you want to browse around, and the store owner says, before you can do that, I need to get your email address before I can show you what I have. Nowhere, it doesn't exist anywhere. So to make a simple change like that, to just recognize, maybe instead of forcing the opt-in at the beginning, let people come in and browse around a little bit, let them look around. That's heresy in the direct response community. Yet, when you start pulling back the curtain on some very successful online businesses, you realize many of them are not forcing the opt-in. They're actually giving away content in the beginning to filter out the wrong prospects to get the right prospects. It's a very tiny change, but that is it's a seismic downstream effect from that one change in thinking.